Lucky and suitably diligent readers might have discovered Annie Proulx around the time of her sweeping and extraordinary 1992 debut postcards. But when her follow-up, The Shipping News, won both the Pulitzer and the National Book Award for Fiction, she announced her presence as a major new voice. It's been almost 2 decades since then, and she's asserted and affirmed her place in the literary canon as one of the finest writers working today. With her novels Accordion Crimes and That Old Ace in the Hole, and 3 celebrated collections of short stories, Close Range, Bad Dirt, and Fine Just the Way It Is. She's an extraordinary writer, and it's a real privilege to have her here. And her latest book, Bird Cloud, is a memoir of sorts about her sometimes fraught attempts to create a home amongst 640 acres of Wyoming wilderness. To get us started tonight, I have asked Annie to read the passage describing her first visit to the land that would become Bird Cloud. So I might hand my copy of the book over.
Thank you, Michael.
And we'll go from there.
Okay. A few weeks later, I did look at it is the property, with the real estate agent who was handling the sale. A bald eagle perched in a dead tree watching us. The agent was acting for the Nature Conservancy, who was the owner of the property. The landscape was bold. Not only was the property on the North Platte River, but the river ran through it, taking an east-west turn for a few miles in its course. The land was a section, 640 acres, a square mile of riparian shrubs and cottonwood, some wetland areas during June high water, sage flats, and a lot of weedy, overgrazed pasture. On the lower portion, about 120 acres, Jack Creek, an important spawning place for trout, came down from the Sierra Madre, 30 miles distant, and angled through the property to enter the North Platte. Jack Creek was big enough to need a bridge, and it had one, a sturdy structure made from the floor of a railroad freight car. The bulk of the property, more than 500 acres, lay at the top of and behind the sandstone cliff, a sloping expanse of sedge and sage. Top and bottom, the land was seriously overgrazed and neglected. Yet the day I first saw it, I also saw a small herd of mule deer, pelicans, bald eagles, great blue herons, waterfowl, ravens, scores of bluebirds, a harrier, a kestrel, and glued to the cliff, thousands of swallow nests. I knew most of Wyoming's wildlife kept to the riparian areas, but this was astonishing. The place was already a diverse wildlife habitat, obviously a refuge for birds, and I thought at once that it could be managed as an avian preserve. It seemed wonderfully private, accessible only by a one-lane right-of-way. I didn't recognize the right-of-way lane as the property's Achilles heel.
It's a beautiful passage that sums up 2 of the kind of qualities of the book. One, a slightly ominous tone, that things might not be as rosy as they appear, but also a real, the way in which the book is a love letter to a place and a particular part of the country. I wanted to kick off by asking how challenging it was for you to reveal this much of yourself on the page. You describe yourself as very shy, and yet you've written a memoir.
Yes, actually the book is a memoir of place, but I felt that I should put something about myself and where I was coming from and why it was attractive to me, and I did, and that took a long time and was very painful. I hated doing that. It was just, I believe in privacy. Even writers like privacy, or maybe especially. And it felt awkward and difficult, but I did it, and then closed my eyes and never looked at it again. So I'm glad you did not ask me to read that part.
The belief in privacy stated to a room of 800 people seems like a difficult position to be in as a writer.
Well, these are friends. This is different.
Okay, we'll keep it amongst ourselves. That shift to non-fiction, though, for the readers of your short stories in particular, particular, that sense of personal connection to this land doesn't come as a surprise. It kind of reinforces long-held suspicions. But did it take a different part of your writerly brain to tackle a major work of non-fiction like this?
I missed the salient verb there. Did it do what to any part of the brain?
Did it require the use of a different part of your brain?
To write the personal stuff?
And non-fiction, more generally.
No, I've written lots of nonfiction, actually. And long before I wrote fiction, I wrote nonfiction. And I still do. I go back and forth and occasionally write a little thing for The Guardian. And I write nonfiction. I do. Honest.
Oh, I do believe you. I mean, some of your early books were... if it's not...
We don't speak of those.
We don't speak of those,
no.
Okay. You've done bits of non-fiction for hire, let's just say, if we don't speak of the early books.
Exactly right.
And it seems to me that, I mean, I want to talk more later on about how beautifully you write about the physical nature of work and different kinds of work and labour. I can't think of another writer who has that kind of consciousness of the work that goes into things. But in your non-fiction, it seems to me the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of craft, of art, of activity is kind of first and foremost. Was that a driving principle in this book?
Well, I like to do research. I was trained as an historian, so doing the research and wiggling small things out of the unknown and onto the page is part of the fun of writing. Also, I'm a reader. I have always been a reader, and reading is probably the best way for someone to learn to write. And for me, getting into the writing was simple because I'd read so much. And after a while, you begin to scribble a few lines and sentences. And if you read really fine writers, you understand almost at once how hard it is to make a beautiful sentence. And you also discover that some people have done it. So there's a challenge there and a pleasure.
Your love of books and your love of reading is something that comes through very, very strongly in Bird Cloud. Partly from a practical perspective, thinking about how to make your new home adequately accommodate the physical side of your love of books.
Yeah, this house was intended to be something I'd always wanted and never had, and that is a library. I needed a place to put the books. I'd never had all of my books out of boxes and on shelves, and so that's what this house was going to be. By God, it was going to have shelves for everything. And the house was designed around what the architect referred to as the bibliothèque, and it had a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and that's it.
Books, kitchen, natural light, bedrooms and bathrooms.
Yes.
That seems like a decent set of priorities.
Indeed, yes. But I sort of made a mistake in my zeal for a quiet workplace, because where I would write, the office end of things, the scribbling, the big table, in the library, there were no windows there except very high ones, so no direct light fell on my precious books. However, it didn't work out as I expected. I thought it would be good to stare at a blank wall and just write and concentrate on the work, but I soon found myself dragging the books out into the room next to the kitchen, and there I could see everything that was happening in the sky and on the cliff, and that's where I do most of the writing. So the thing is to have a window put in the library.
The kind of thing you only learn. The kind of thing you only learn afterwards.
Yes, I learned a lot of things afterwards.
Well, the book is a terrific kind of account of that journey of learning. I have to ask, just as a sidebar for a second, the library, do you alphabetize your books, or do they go in through some other personal ordering mechanism?
In theory, they are alphabetized, but the old house where I had the books were in a certain order, and even with hundreds of books, you could remember that such and such a book, Charles Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, is 3 down from a book with a yellow jacket, and that kind of thing. And of course, that is destroyed when you get into the alphabet stuff. I had a young woman who worked for me for a year, and she cataloged the books and then shelved them in direct contradiction to the cataloging. So I can look in the catalog, which is on computer, and see, yes, I have it, it's somewhere, but where might it be? And then begins the hunt.
That's an incredibly calm way of expressing that. I think I'd be enraged.
Well, it's serendipitous to go mushing about and looking for a particular book and think of the wonderful things you find on the way. I've always liked that.
It's a pretty good, the unlikely bedfellows side by side on the bookshelf is always a good thing. I want to ask about those books because everything you've written, it seems to me, is steeped in kind of extraordinary learning and research. You talked about your background as a historian. Do you read much fiction, or is most of what you're reading non-fiction by way of kind of preparation for books?
Almost everything I read is non-fiction. I occasionally do read fiction, but usually it's history or geology or anthropology or the OED or other things, not fiction.
And I partly ask because it's far too early in the event for me to make kind of grand complimentary summing up statements, but I'm going to make one now, which is that when you spoke before about people who craft beautiful sentences, and you are one of the writers who I would put in that category, does that... Your fiction reads like fiction by someone who reads a lot of fiction and understands the difference between good and bad.
I have read a lot of fiction in my life, but what interests me now is not reading a lot more fiction. I think I've got it with up to a point, but you're always surprised. Somebody does something that's quite different and rather delightful. I'm just reading now Dermot Healy's new book, which is quite unlike anything he's written before or that I've ever read. So there are lots of new tricks, even with old dogs.
Do you look to be surprised by what you read? Is that a kind of guiding principle?
No. I look to be interested and to look for solutions to ongoing puzzles that you carry around in your mind, those puzzles about life and how things work and where the wind comes from and that sort of thing.
Do you keep that interest in topics? I mean, it strikes me that ranging from, right from postcards, but the shipping news, accordion crimes, are you still fascinated by accordions, or does there come a point where you say, I'm done with that now?
Yeah, I'm still fascinated by them. I did a program the other morning with Margaret Throsby, and one of the pieces of music that I chose was Brazilian bandoneon player, the bandoneon being the big uncle of the accordion crowd, Dino Saluzzi, and a jazz musician. And I was, I still like accordion music. Yeah.
I think the acknowledgement section of Accordion Crimes goes for 4 or 5 pages, and it's a list of people you spoke to, people you felt you had a debt to, who conveyed their passion for the thing that you were writing about. And I was really interested in that relationship between oral history research and the stuff you read when preparing for a book.
Written accordion stuff was not that easy to find, and some of the key people were not that easy to find. So I thought it would be very helpful to others who had a keen interest in the world of accordionists to include that, and it has been useful.
It does feel like a veritable community in those pages.
Yeah, it is. And I still get very sweet letters from accordion people.
One of the reasons I find myself going back to accordion crimes is that I was reminded of it a bit in Bird Cloud when you're talking about that question of home and place, and it felt to me that the two books stemmed from the same curiosity on your part, or the same passion. Is that?
You put your finger right on it, yeah.
Oh,
Quite so.
Nice. I might go now, actually, because that's a high point.
Well, I think it's an existential situation. I think it applies for everybody, or for a lot of people. So, yeah, the question of where was home, and these 9 or 8 groups of immigrants who came to the United States, the only thing they had in common was an accordion and accordion music. So the question of home, the person who comes first as an immigrant breaks the trail. The kids dislike the old ways, the old music, the old culture, and think their parents are dull sticks. And maybe the third generation recovers and takes delight in some of those things. So this kind of thing was part of Accordion Crimes, and it was fun to write about, fun to explore, and certainly fun to go roving around the country listening to good music.
There's the flip side of that, I guess, is what we see, especially in the early passages of Bird Cloud, which is the kind of melancholy of that homelessness, if you like, that search for a sense of belonging. And it interested me the way in which you turned that lens on yourself in this. You talk about it as a memoir of place, but your account of your family and your own childhood is very, very moving, I think.
Yeah. That's certainly to do with place, too. I was exploring that myself while I was writing it. I didn't know when I started to write that section where I was going with it, or even if I could bear to write about it, or even if it was worth writing about, because some of it was rather unpleasant. But I got through it and lived.
Well, live to be here, so that's a good thing. But it seems very interesting to me, that search from you for that home, that place of belonging. You're not likely to turn around and do a collection of short stories set in Connecticut, are you? Despite your own family's kind of time spent there. Or are you? Is that wrong?
It could be. I don't know. I really don't. Actually, I've redefined myself since I wrote that. I don't think of myself as searching for a home. I've accepted that I'm semi-homeless forever.
And happy in that state?
Yeah.
Where do you put the books if you're semi-homeless?
I said semi.
Ah, good.
Yeah, I'll go where the books are for most of the year, and then for a little while I won't.
No, that seems like a very solid instinct to me. I'm happy with that. I read an interview with you where you talked about some of your early stories were published in Gray's Sporting Journal, and around that time you described yourself as an ardent fisher person and bird hunter.
Yes.
And the way you write about birds and the natural world in Bird Cloud, this may be naive, but it seemed completely at odds with someone who'd once hunted birds. Do you have a sense of a change in yourself, or are they part of the same passion?
Expiation.
One-word answers are going to kill me. I'm just saying. It's a very good answer, don't get me wrong, but it was a very wordy question.
I'm so sorry. It was a good question, and it deserved more than that. As Mr. Doctorow would say if he were here, and he would launch into a thing like the old Steinberg conversations on a page with whirls and stars. But I quit hunting birds. Very few birds ever fell before my gun anyway. And it's heavy toting a shotgun around, so I just quit.
Well,
Binoculars are lighter.
I'm sure you weren't a poor hunter because you didn't have an eye for them. The passages where you talk about birds in this book are utterly beautiful, and I say that as someone who honestly has an almost Tippi Hedren-like aversion to birds. I really, I don't get it, and yet you write absolutely beautifully about the natural world. Has that always been a passion?
Yes, it has. Not my own passion, borrowed from my mother, I guess. My mother's family, forever and ever, they arrived in the United States in 1635, and they were always deeply interested in the landscape and what was around, the plants, the animals, and so forth, always. So all of my aunties and cousins and uncles knew all of the plants, gathered nuts, did everything. You know, they knew the woods of New England. And to this day, my cousins and I still exchange gossip about wonderful things that we've seen. And just 2 weeks ago, I had an email with a wonderful photograph of a backyard bobcat in the snow from one of my Connecticut cousins. It's very jolly. So we never let go of that. It was just part of being a kid in New England. And something that was very odd, a few months ago, I wrote an article for the New York Public Library's upcoming centennial of something or other, I don't remember which. And this is in celebration of all kinds of treasures that it has in the archives that people don't know about. And I got to write on Henry Thoreau's last manuscript, his very last book, which was published 123 years after his death, but not before, as Faith in Seeds. And it is a rather marvelous essay on seeds, tree seeds especially, at a time when it was believed that trees erupted spontaneously from the soil and that something as small as a seed could not possibly make a tree. But Thoreau was such an odd bird. This is not Thoreau the nature boy. It's not Thoreau the Walden Pond. It's not any of the Thoreaus that I had known before. It's this lonely, very ugly man with this mass of red whiskers growing up his neck that made a ruff around his face. Quite a homely person. I think Emily Dickinson thought he was repulsive. But poor old Thoreau was always a bachelor. He was sick. He had tuberculosis. And he was crazy about seedlings. He wrote wonderful passages about going into an old pasture that had been full of pines. The farmer chopped them all down, and here sprang up oaks. And he just doted on these tiny little seedlings, and he was very upset when the farmer came and plowed them all up. But so much of Thoreau's New England is gone now. So many of the trees that were there when he was there, that were there when my grandparents were there, even when my mother and her sisters were children, that for a couple of days working on this essay, I was just swept back into the world of childhood. All of the plants and the smells and the things were there, and they're gone. In reality, they're not there anymore. So how did I get on that tangent?
I am so glad you did. I'm not sure I can track back, but it was the natural world and your relationship to it.
So some of my earliest memories are of that. My mother, when I was about 2 years old, my mother, whose favorite author was Jean Stratton Porter, who wrote something called Girl of the Limberlost. Probably no one in this room knows that book. Oh, there is.
Show of hands over here.
Yay, wonderful. It was my mother's very favorite book. And she took me for a walk, and we went into a swamp. And she hopped from one hummock of grass to the next one with no trouble, but I was marooned and couldn't get across the water, so I stood there bawling on a quivering lump of swamp grass. And that kind of dampened my ardor for swamps. for a while, but it was that kind of thing. And she was also a grand storyteller and very anthropomorphic. Everything that she looked at and had us look at soon took on personalities. Ant hills were a particular favorite. We'd be watching ants, and she'd give them names, particular ants that were carrying things that identified them. Sort of like Tim, what's his name's, the things they carried. That's how we knew the ants. One would have eggs, one a little twig, one a piece of leaf or something. So, and we sit for hours watching this, and these were our toys. So.
It's little wonder you needed a window in your library in bird cloud. It's
yeah.
Turning your back on that doesn't seem like something you'd be likely to be able to do.
No, my intentions were good, but they didn't work.
The book is almost entirely about good intentions thwarted by circumstance.
Strange about that.
Is it? It must be very odd for you at the book tour stage, talking about and reflecting on a period that, for all the lightness of touch in the way that you write about it, must have given you quite a bit of grief. The building of a dream home that not to spoil the book for anyone who hasn't read it, might fall short of expectation.
I don't think it was grief so much as blind rage. The adventure of the floor was extremely tiresome, rather a trial. And now I live in dread that because of certain changes in the area, we had a 100-year flood last year, and the water crept up to within 30 feet of the house, and the house's heating system is in the floor that has cost so much labor and money and anguish. And there's a huge snowpack in the mountains, and I'm living in absolute dread that it's going to happen again, that we're going to have a 100-year flood every year. But I haven't been able to get flood insurance because I'm here, and the flood insurance people are there. It's very complicated.
I'm not sure this is great use of your time then. Insurance you might want to get on to quickly.
I'm trying, but you have to have a FEMA elevation certificate before the insurance company will speak to you. And I managed to get one by dint of the James gang, who are mentioned in the book many times, and they have managed to meet with the engineers, and we got an elevation certificate, and it's in the hands of the insurance person. But now we need a second quote. It was too high. So.
It doesn't sound like blind rage to me. It sounds like very clear-eyed rage. The James gang do feature very prominently in the book. For those who haven't read it, could you describe them? Because they're almost like Annie Proulx creations rather than...
They would not like to hear that. There are... the central core consists of 3 people. These are local guys, 2 brothers, and the lover of one of the brothers. And there's a 4th or a 3rd brother off in Alaska. But because their last name is James, I always call them the James gang. They tend to think of themselves as trees. I think their business name has something to do with trees, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but I stumbled upon them by accident. They did some landscaping for me, and they're genius landscapers. 2 of them did the landscaping, and I was looking for someone to build a house and having absolutely no luck. And I met with some beastly fellow with close-set eyes who had an enormous cutout of John Wayne on his wall in his office. And if there's one thing I know, I don't want a cowboy builder. And then I met with another fellow way down in Laramie, which is more than 100 miles away in the winter. And this fellow built dreadful houses, very shoddy, very expensive plastic houses. Didn't want him. that about exhausted it. There wasn't anybody else. And I was bemoaning the fact I couldn't find a builder to a friend one day, and the friend said, well, what's the matter with Gerald? And I said, Gerald who? And she said, Gerald James. And Gerald was the youngest one of the brothers, living with the fiction that he's 25. He's about 45. And very, very thin, has to buy his blue jeans in the boys section, and has long, long blonde hair, and is fearless. Was a champion wrestler at age 14. And so I said, well, what about Gerald? And my friend said, well, he's the best damn builder in the state. And I had no idea. I said, well, he helps out Dave and Daryl. Yeah, yes, but he's a builder. So then I didn't know Gerald very well, so I wrote a letter to the two that I did know, the landscapers, and said, would Trees Unlimited undertake the construction of the house? And I didn't hear anything for a week. I learned later that the James gang mulls things over for quite a while before they agreed to do it. But then they said in a very offhand way, yeah, we'd love to do it. And they set to work, and it's just been a love story ever since.
I was going to say, your fates intertwined after that.
They did.
Trips to hospital, all manner of things.
Yeah, one of the James gang had been, I should tell you that Wyoming does not have good medical care unless you have a broken limb. They're very, very good at joint and bone repair. It's a place that has lots of rodeos and ranches, so that's the kind of doctors we've got. But anything outside of that realm is difficult. The local Sawbones had told Daryl that he had 6 months to live, that he had bone cancer, and she had given him prescriptions for something absolutely beastly. And so he was dragging around and trying to build this house and be jolly. And I had a hip problem, and I didn't know whether it was arthritis or a sign from the devil, and I was going to go down to the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, which was the nearest one of the 3 Mayos. So I said to Daryl, you better come along and let's see what's really wrong with you. It won't hurt to get a second opinion. And away we went, rented a red car, a convertible, went to the Mayo Clinic, and I was in there and out of there in no time at all. They said, you've got bursitis, do some exercises, go away. But Daryl was in there all day long, and the next day and the next day, and I think the doctor said to him that whoever had told him he had bone cancer ought to have their license taken away at once. He had some kind of nerve pressure in his back, and he was given the address of a new doctor in Colorado and began to feel better almost at once, and this was years ago now, and he's certainly not dead. He's done very well and is hale and hearty and keeps on climbing on roofs and building things. So yes, that started it. And it turns out that one of the James gang is a most advanced geologist who went to the Colorado School of Mines and is a fountain of information. They also like archaeology. I introduced him to an archaeologist friend of mine, and I think they sucked his brain dry. It was quite something. And we began going out on explorations, digging up things, putting them back, looking at geology, looking at at archaeological sites, sometimes with my archaeologist friends, sometimes just me and the James gang. We climbed around on the cliff. We went up into the mountains. We just went adventuring all over the place and had a grand time. I have not yet gone with them, though, to their favorite haunt, which is up on the top of Mount Antero, one of the 14,000-foot range in the Wasatch Range in Colorado. They go up there to look for crystals and other wonderful things and dig every year. That's their vacation, 2 weeks up with the lightning bolts. So I haven't been up there because it is a dangerous place.
I have to say, I think the road trip in the red convertible is probably danger enough without going up the mountain.
Yeah, because Daryl did the driving, and he drives Wyoming style. Wyoming is regarded as a kind of free-for-all state where anything goes. And so he'd make U-turns in the most improbable places, and when I protested, he said, well, if they stop me, I'll just say I come from Wyoming. What do I know? That didn't happen. But we also discovered a good place with terrific margaritas, so it was a pretty good trip.
I wanted to ask you about that archaeological, and there's a terrific account of going through and kind of trying to better understand the land that you're on and the land that Bird Cloud is on. And actually quite early in the book you make a comparison to Uluru, and you, in some of the geological features of the land. But I'm interested, in Australia we have a very fraught relationship with the traditional owners of our land. It's such unfinished business, that question of ownership and that question of respect to the land that we widely recognise settler Australians took away from its original owners. Did your research into the traditional owners of Bird Cloud, did it reveal things you didn't previously know?
Oh, certainly. Not the Native Americans, because they're hard to find anything about from that far back. But we have, of course, found artifacts, grindstones and projectile points and hammer rocks, that sort of thing. And that's been interesting. We expect to find some bison remains at one point, because there's a great place on the cliff to drive a herd of bison over the edge, which was one of the ways that the Indians got bison at a certain period. But you never know where they're going to be next, and we keep finding these things. I think we found 8 or 10 different sites, and a couple summers ago I found this huge, beautiful piece of obsidian lying in the sagebrush. There's no obsidian for many miles around. It could only have come from the famous obsidian cliff in Yellowstone, which is about 350 miles distant. But this is just an ongoing pleasure, you know, to go out and dig around on the property. And at one point it became extremely useful. They uncovered a fire pit, and that's usually what we find, fire pits, holes with charcoal in them that can be carbon dated. In the driveway, not far from the house, on the level, found a fire pit, and my friend, the archaeologist, was there, and he took the charcoal away and had it carbon dated, and it came back 2,700 years old. It had had about an inch of soil over the top of it, and he said, well, that's good to know. Because that means that the river hasn't flooded up here in 2,700 years. It's behind the house, not in front. And so I was much gratified at this. He said the inch of soil on top was undoubtedly wind deposited. Not to worry about it. We'd be good for a couple thousand years. So I thought of that, of course, when the flood came last year, but it didn't ever get that high. It didn't come to the house. It stayed away from the house.
It's very charitable to think that that's wood, but we'll go with that.
Well, these days, everything you knock on is plastic.
Close enough, I think. It's reliable. In an interview with the Paris Review around the time that you were writing Bird Cloud, you said that you were done with stories about Wyoming. Do you still feel that way?
Probably, yeah. I'm working on something else.
Is it premature to ask what?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well,
But I'll tell you.
Oh, good. Even better.
Yeah. No, for 10 or 15 years, I've been thinking of writing a novel about the cutting of the forests. And so I'm working on a novel about exactly that over a long period of time, from moving from the Canadian Maritimes across northern North America, down across the Pacific, and down to New Zealand and the Kauri forests. So that's what I'm working on. That's really why I'm here, right?
So your shelves are full of books about logging at the moment?
Yeah, good. I would say so.
And that, as a topic for you, it makes perfect sense. Your accounts of societies on the edge of desolation and the kind of...
And societies making their own desolation.
That's true. It seems like a very neat fit. Is that the kind of trigger that normally drives you to a new story or a new novel? Is it an idea like that, or is it place, or is it character?
Oh, well, this is definitely place or places. It's not unlike Accordion Crimes, which was a lot of different places and different people, so it's similar in that way. But the overriding theme of the whole thing about the cutting of forests and the different ways it was done. I mean, the technological ways that forests come down and what are done with them and so forth, I find interesting. So I'm working to make it interesting to the reader.
Do you have an inkling before you start that it's a novel, that it's a major work rather than a story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes. Stories usually spring into mind complete, and novels are looser. I know where I'm going, but I don't know directly where I'm going.
I've heard you describe short stories as the superior art form to the novel. Do you still feel that way?
I happen to believe that, yeah. I think they're much harder to write. I think they're very, very, very demanding, and I think probably the writing of short stories has caused many divorces.